Merit. It's the word that ends most arguments. We hired the best person to do the job. The exam was fair. Everyone had the same opportunity. But who decides what merit even means? Merit isn't found, it's constructed, and those who already hold power are usually the ones doing the constructing. Take, for instance, India's IIT entrance system. Touted as a pure test of intelligence, it often rewards access to years of expensive coaching, a coaching that only a sliver of population can afford. The result? A merit list that maps closely to privilege, not potential. We love to spotlight the rare stories. A student from a small town who cracks the IIT, the first generation learner who makes it to the top ranks. And yes, their stories are extraordinary. They are outliers, not indicators of equality. They are extraordinary because the system demands something close to a miracle for them to succeed. Their struggle is often used to claim the system is open, when in reality, it's structured so that very few like them ever make it. The outlier becomes the proof. The exception becomes the excuse to preserve the status quo. That's not meritocracy. That's mythology. You'll find echoes of this logic elsewhere too. In United States, elite college admissions often use standardized tests like SAT to claim fairness. But wealthy families can afford test prep courses, private tutoring, and legacy preferences, while first-generation students are told to prove themselves on a supposedly level field. This logic has deep roots. During the Jim Crow era, black voters in the American South were subjected to the so-called literacy tests, exams designed to appear neutral but used to deny voting rights. These tests weren't about literacy. They were about filtering out the poor and the black under the disguise of standardization. The setting has changed, the language has changed, but the tool, using the illusion of fairness to preserve inequality, hasn't. While first generation of students are told to prove themselves on a supposedly level field, when a handful succeed, it's treated as proof that anyone can, ignoring the structural tilt that made the odds so uneven to begin with. Reservation policies are one attempt to rebalance this skew, a recognition that the starting line isn't the same for everyone. But even these policies are frequently attacked in the name of merit. Reservation exists not to bypass merit, but to question how narrowly we've defined it and to recognize that potential can't flourish where the opportunity has been withheld for generations. Yet, even this corrective measure is framed as an unfair advantage, as though one competitive exam could neutralize centuries of exclusion. In publishing, someone who writes in polished English is more likely to get published and praised, not always because their ideas are better, but because their language fits an editorial mold shaped by elite tastes. This isn't to say that English fluency isn't valuable in a global world. It clearly is. But the problem lies in how it's often treated as a stand-in for intelligence, clarity, or worth. Brilliant thinkers expressing themselves in different registers, dialects, or languages are too often ignored, not because their ideas lack merit, but because they don't speak in the sanctioned tone of professional discourse. In each case, it's not lived brilliance or hard-earned potential that rises, it's the one that fits the mold, a mold shaped long ago by those already inside. They decide the exams, the interviews, the qualifications. They decide which schools are respected, which accents sounds professional, which internships count. And quietly, this idea of merit becomes a mirror, reflecting back the qualities that people in power already see in themselves. The mirror stops being a reflection of ability and instead becomes a reflection of comfort, a way for those in power to recognize, reward, and reproduce what they already understand. Confidence is rewarded, but only the kind that feels familiar. Intelligence is celebrated, but only when it speaks in the right tone and comes from the right kind of person the system already trusts. Not always openly. Sometimes it's in the school they attend, the way they phrase things, or the networks they quietly belong to. It's not just what's being said, it's who the system is comfortable hearing it from. And what the mirror doesn't reflect, it vanishes. Grit doesn't shine through, adaptability doesn't impress. Cultural fluency, multilingual brilliance, lived wisdom, they don't register because the mirror was never made to see them. So, what's passed off as objective selection is really selective reflection. It reflects back what the power already recognizes, not what the society truly needs. Take two students in a same classroom. One shows up on time, joins every club, volunteers for leadership roles. The other seems distracted, quiet, always on the edge of exhaustion. We call the first motivated, maybe even high potential, but we rarely ask what makes the motivation visible. What if the second student is waking up early to cook for younger siblings, dealing with a parent in crisis, or simply surviving a chaos at home? What if they are carrying emotional and logistic burdens that make punctuality and polish a luxury they can't afford? Hey, I hear you. Of course, getting the job done matters, and in this case, the first student is clearly the right choice. But is he? The question isn't whether competence is important, it's who gets seen as competent in the first place. We confuse visibility with value, assuming the one who looks ready must be better prepared. But not all preparation looks the same. Some prepare through structure, others through survival. The problem is we only know how to reward one kind. We reward readiness without asking what it took to get ready. We mistake ease for ability, comfort for competence, and in doing so, we quietly design merit to reflect freedom from hardship, not the ability to overcome it. A loop where merit keeps circling back to privilege, disguised as fairness. And when they don't get selected, it isn't called exclusion. There's no rejection letter that says you're too poor or you don't belong here. It's quieter than that and more believable. She seemed more prepared and articulate. We felt he was a better fit for the role. He wasn't a great culture fit. She lacked leadership presence. All polite ways of saying, not our kind. So the door stays open, technically, but behind it stands an invisible filter, and every time someone passes through, that filter quietly checks. Are you like us? This is how exclusion disguises itself, not as a force, but as a formality, not as denial, but as decorum. It doesn't look like injustice, it looks like process. And so rejection becomes rational, bias becomes policy, and inequality becomes a system that no one feels responsible for. But fairness isn't sameness, equality isn't equity. A fish and a monkey taking the same test to climb a tree doesn't make the test fair, it just flatters the monkey. So when someone says we only want the best, we have to ask, who defined best? What if merit isn't an objective truth, but a gatekeeping language dressed up as logic? What if it's not about who's deserving, but who has already been designed to win? Nowhere is this more visible than in debates around caste-based reservations in India. Upper caste individuals often invoke merit as a reason to oppose reservation policies, as if merit is neutral, untouched by history. But for generations, access to schools, literacy, property, and even right to enter the temple or hold a pen was denied to vast sections of the society. When that history is ignored, merit becomes a cover, a polite word for inherited advantage. We've been told that merit is pure, that it floats above history, above inequality, above bias. But it doesn't. It grows in soil, and that soil is not the same for everyone. Some inherit sunlight, some inherit shadows, and yet, when harvest time comes, we act as if everyone planted under equal skies. So the question isn't just who's the best, It's who had the chance to become their best and who didn't. Because systems don't just preserve power, they define what counts as power. And until we change that definition, best will keep looking like the past, not the future. Imagine two people, equally brilliant, equally driven. One takes a well lit path, elite college, fluent mentors, polished internships. The other forges through the rough, night shifts, local library, open courses on borrowed phones. One is called a high flyer, the other is told, "You are impressive for where you come from." But years later, it's the second who builds something the system could never imagine, a platform, a movement, a breakthrough that rewrites what success can look like. Not by playing the game better, but by changing the rules. Not by asking for an entry, but by opening a door that was never there before. That too is merit. It just didn't come with a certificate.